Pleasure and honor it is to speak with you all this evening. I'm so grateful to Thea Gomalori for suggesting and organizing this discussion. Now, for more than 2.5 millennia, the verses of Psalms have welled up in the hearts and minds of Jews and Christians in countless situations, from reveries about the beauty and order of the world, to celebrations of the power of the divine, to desperate prayer for rescue from danger, to confidence that our providential God will always be at our side. Consequently, our immediate emotional and spiritual needs, the public or private settings of our song, even our fleeting moods, shade our conversations with the divine as we read and sing the songs in different moments in our lives. The Psalms, of course, while traditionally attributed to King David, were composed and recomposed over a period of probably 500 or 600 years, a period which itself saw dramatic changes in the Jerusalem temple culture from which they spring. And for us, different moments change the tenor of our internal and communal conversations with the divine and can lead us away from rote recitals of these beloved spiritual poems into entirely new societal associations and personal responses to the biblical words. These rich poems coax whole spectra of responses from us, depending upon how, when, and why we read them. Quite apart from my personal experiences with Psalms, whether in synagogue or around the Shabbat and festival dinner tables, I've had the opportunity for two deep focus projects on the Psalms, namely my 2007 book, I Will Wake the Dawn, Illuminated Psalms, an anthology and commentary of 36 Psalms, and my 2012 book of the Jewish Friday evening liturgy, Welcoming the Sabbath, Kabbalat Shabbat, the Grand Unification project yet. I'd like to invite you to join me to retrace my different routes through three of these Psalms today, 29, 92, and 96. So pack your bag with your own associations with these Psalms and come along. Before we set out, though, let me share with you something of how I approach the creation of modern Hebrew or Hebrew English illuminated manuscripts. Now, you might well ask, well, very nice, but what is the point of this archaic medium altogether now in the era of, never mind printing, but the internet and AI? Let me answer this today by sharing with you the ways that I approach the creation of modern Hebrew illuminated manuscripts. You'll see how this medium can do far more than enhance the aesthetics and emotions of readers' experience, but actually interpret and amplify the subtleties of the text at hand, its relationship to our greater world, to create coherent visual midrash. As we'll see here, there are many possible readings of the Psalms, many ways of interpreting, of creating visual midrash on these beloved poems. A painting, or a sculpture for that matter, can communicate dozens of ideas instantly, and an illumination fuses our words and images, tying us to 2 millennia of our visual and intellectual cultures beautifully. This 1434 painting, which I'm sure many of you know well, is from the hand of an artist who came out of a tradition of illuminated manuscripts. Now, this portrait has taught me almost everything I know about building the meaning of a painting. I work daily under a reproduction, and a visit with it in the National Gallery has been about my first stop, after hugging my cousins, on even the briefest trip to London. The religious and ethical value of every single item you see here adds up to a detailed moral and ethical marriage contract between two 15th century young people, not simply a fusion of two Florentine banking families. So the religious and ethical value of every single item you see here adds up to a detailed moral and ethical marriage contract between two 15th century young people, not simply a fusion of two Florentine banking families. A few examples: the dog represents fidelity, the sabbats or clogs, protection from the elements, the single candle glowing in the chandelier, the light of Jesus, and under the mirror, the artist witnessed, literally, Jan van Eyck was here. Now, obviously, since I work within Jewish tradition, my imagery is very different from that of 15th century Christianity. Mine is based in other biblical texts, colorful exegesis from many rabbinic sources, and many avenues of Western thought and science. However, unlike in the Christian tradition, I've needed to develop most of this iconographic vocabulary myself. Jewish cultures, whether Eastern or Western, have rich and ancient traditions of visual art, but the imagery has tended to be narrative or sheerly decorative, rather than expressive of abstract ideas. The second commandment, prohibition on portraying God, has something to do with this, but really not very much, since Jewish art is full of recognizable human imagery, with a very few famous exceptions. This prohibition has really related only to envisioning the divine, and Jewish artists have, as a rule, taken this very seriously, as I do as well. My sense is that the lack of abstract idea in Jewish visual art, whereas our literature is full of highly visual metaphor, is largely a matter of the generally high level of literacy among historical Jewish audiences. There are a few medieval instances of abstract visual symbolism, but so far as I know, these mostly relate to hidden messages about political oppression. Didactic imagery, I suspect, was simply of less importance to the significantly literate Jewish populace than in the Christian world, where among most classes it was essential, was often essential. Nowadays, however, as our general surrounding Western culture is so heavily influenced by the internet, culture has become ever more visual, and our minds and eyes have changed. One of my challenges over 3 decades has been to develop a modern Jewish iconographic vocabulary capable of teasing out abstract concepts in visual form, reflecting both thought native not only to expressly Jewish tradition, but also the cultural and scientific worlds within which we live. Following the lead of Van Eyck, as analyzed by the art historian Erwin Panofsky, I create disguised symbolism in a scene that usually makes logical sense, all explained in commentaries in each book. These symbolic images aren't simply plastered around the composition to be read separately, but work together to create this coherent visual midrash of the work, melding classical readings with reflections from my cultural surround as a 20th and 21st century Western woman. Now, how do I construct the visual midrash? Moshe Halbertal has described Jewish culture as a text-centered community, and my own interpretive work is nothing if not text-centered. Each project begins with some years studying the chosen text, in this case, the Psalms, along with its rabbinic commentaries and modern academic Bible studies, and of course, regular discussions with my collaborators. In each painting by writing, and as I consider each passage, many more associations spring to mind, and I develop a mental picture of where I want to go. Since one always sees a 2-page spread in a book, I paint both facing illuminations, each of which usually incorporates either the Hebrew or English text together. At the simplest level, pictures catch our eye, encouraging us to stop for a moment and consider the image and the words that inspire it. Once we slow down to consider the text and painting, though, the choice of the visual imagery accompanying the poem invites a reverie of thoughts related to the literal text of the psalm. The images chosen for the illuminations, taken together, create this visual midrash, exploring the import of the poem in our own lives and our own world. The reader, I hope, will be drawn to consider the imagery in the illuminations, to contemplate and compare its message to his or her own life. Thus, while scholars have described Psalms as an inner dialogue between psalmist and Almighty, in looking at the illuminations of these unique poems, I'm encouraging us all to participate in a 3-way conversation between the psalmist, the Almighty, and ourselves. Through this inner conversation, we articulate our emotional or spiritual challenges. We may meditate upon our own relationship with the divine. And if we accept the availability of the Almighty, we may confront the awe of the divine and reach a state of confidence that we're not alone in resolving our challenges. For instance, in a world of often nihilistic popular culture, where the challenges of raising a healthy family may seem overwhelming, Psalm 28, which I'm not treating in depth today, celebrates the serenity and satisfaction in Jewish tradition, nachas or nachat, of a flourishing family. In the illumination of that psalm, the eagles nesting in an olive tree may remind the viewer of biblical and midrashic ideas about God, about how God offers a model of the perfect parent, protecting the chosen people as an eagle protects its young. While this allusion draws upon textual sources that may be obscure in modern society, the accompanying commentary on the illumination explains the image. In 2007, the Jewish Publication Society published my second book, I Will Wake the Dawn, Illuminated Psalms, which I had done over the previous several years at the urging and with the participation of my late father-in-law, the eminent scholar of Hebrew literature, Arnold Band of UCLA. To be honest with you, although I'd grown up as an educated and observant Jew, I never paid much attention to the real meaning of the Psalms beyond reciting them more or less by habit in synagogue and home services. 3 years of intensive study and almost obsessive painting, illuminations and commentaries of 36 Psalms in 14 months changed all that. The anthology of Psalms that we chose for this book samples the spectrum of emotional and spiritual expressions embodied in the 150 Psalms, and in part reflects my own new appreciation of these poems at a particularly difficult time in my own life. The anthology includes Psalms of personal and communal rejoicing and gratitude, prayers for healing and redemption in times of desperation, including some singled out by the famous 18th century Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. The anthology incorporates psalms expressing the love of and longing for Jerusalem, a number prominent in the Jewish synagogue and home liturgies, including the entire Hallel cycle, several psalms of the day, psalms included in morning rites, the introductory psalms for the grace after meals, and finally, a number of psalms from which Jewish tradition derives popular folk songs sung at weddings and other life cycle celebrations. My interpretations of these psalms' meanings, in the light of my own experience, stand within the Jewish interpretive tradition. The book's commentary materials, of course, offer all of this, as well as their liturgical uses within major denominations of Christianity, or major divisions of Christianity, which I learned with the help of several Christian theologians, most notably Ellen Davis of Duke Divinity School. My study and painting for this book, the latter, as I mentioned, over an intense 14 months, occupied me during the painful and always challenging early years of my first husband David's battle with a unique spinal cord cancer that would take his life a couple of years after this work's publication. I actually thank the team at the NIH who cared for him during his illness in my acknowledgments. I discovered both the screams and the comfort, the anger and the ecstasy within this literature. And each week of painting, I could choose the mood that I needed to live within, either for expression of my emotions or distraction from them. This project was a significant part of my emotional and spiritual survival of that terrible time. Now, the late Friday afternoon prayer service that welcomes the sundown arrival of the Sabbath, Kabbalat Shabbat, well, literally receiving Shabbat, includes a number of psalms, 29, and most of the 90s. This beautiful service, nowadays often sung by the congregation with lyrical melodies by the famous mid-20th century Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, is deeply beloved for the ecstatic nature of both the poetry and the as one congregational singing. The nature of the service led me to a very specific line of interpretation of the Psalms. The modern Kabbalat Shabbat service was initiated by the 16th century mystic Isaac Luria during his rocket-like 2-year career in the community of Tzfat in northern Israel. Here's a photo of his primary synagogue. In 2016, I published an illuminated book of this liturgy and the Friday night dinner table service surrounding it, entitled Kabbalat Shabbat, the Grand Unification, along with new translations of the Psalms and other poetry and textual commentary by Raymond Scheindlin of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, who himself has spent lots of time at Oxford. Let me explain some of the ideas behind the Kabbalat Shabbat service itself and my very particular interest in it to introduce you to the illuminations from this project that I'll be showing you soon. Now, Luria and his companions in Svat received and wrought dramatic developments in a continuous mystical tradition stretching back through the Renaissance and medieval Italy to Spain, Provence, and ultimately Israel, as far back as the Temple periods. The term Kabbalah, in fact, literally means that which is received. The tradition that Luria and his community of fellow mystics received had been the secretive study of an exclusive group of the most sophisticated Jewish scholars for over 1,500 years. Secretive because the early mystical rabbis worried that without a thorough grounding in Jewish learning, the mystical ideas could look like polytheism. Kabbalah suggests that the energy of the unified but unknowable central Godhead flows into the material world through a complex series of emanations of wisdom, knowledge, and ethical qualities. So it's easy to understand how the untrained mind could regard these emanations as deities unto themselves, which they most definitely are not. Luria's band, however, revolutionized that secretive tradition by opening it up to the greater Jewish community through this ecstatic prayer service, enabling elements of Kabbalistic tradition to reach the masses of the community. The influence has also revolutionized the modern Jewish community. The theology, the whole Hasidic movement, beginning in the mid-18th century Ukraine, grew from the Lurianic community's popularization of Jewish mysticism, a prime example of which is the Kabbalat Shabbat service. Now, my approach involves far more than Jewish mysticism alone. As people of the dawn of the 21st century who heard the news the day in 2006, when the Nobel Prize was awarded for dating the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, when we now know that there are innumerable planets in the universe and even have proof of primitive life somewhere else, I strongly believe that it's essential that we understand Shabbat through not only the spiritual, but also through the tangible and physical aspects of our world. To me, an essential question in Jewish life. And I know that similar questions occupy many Christian thinkers as well, is how to satisfy the hungry and demanding minds of people planted in the material world of data and science, and still give them a portal into the world of the spirit, of the historical panoply of Jewish community and thought, while maintaining the integrity of the tradition. In our fast-paced, data-driven world, in this marketplace of ideas, Jews need to have a real-world reason to drop everything on Friday afternoon and focus instead on spiritual matters. Now, we have to find a way of making it all make sense to show all our generations that the world of our daily experience and the world of our souls are in fact one. This book became the journey that has helped me resolve this dichotomy through the fusing of understanding of science and mysticism, of poetry, metaphor, paint, parchment, and gold. This project led me to places I never expected to go. I come from a long line of Jewish scholars and rabbis descended from the celebrated Hasidic master Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, but in recent generations, the family consciousness became much more aligned with normalist, rationalist Jewish rabbinic thought. My late first husband, David, was an MIT and Harvard-educated astrophysicist, descended from an even more thoroughly rationalist Litvak or Lithuanian Jewish scholarly background, with whom I spent the first 30-odd years of my adult life. His career led me to become entirely comfortable in the intellectual world of modern physics and science, and more than slightly skeptical about a more mystical approach to existence than that native to mainstream traditional Judaism. When I decided to take on this project several years after David's death, I had assiduously avoided Jewish mysticism for very specific reasons that we can discuss later if you'd like. I immersed myself in it now under the guidance of the celebrated American scholar of Jewish mysticism, Arthur Green, with whom I've since done several book projects, with one coming out later this summer, in fact. Almost immediately, I discovered, to my complete incredulity, that the questions and concerns probed in Kabbalah were strikingly similar to those at the heart of the scientific world in which I lived my entire adult life. Kabbalah seemed to share the same concerns as cosmology and particle physics, questions concerning the beginnings of the world, the unity of all matter, and appreciating and perpetuating the glorious order of the world around us. Now, this was all very perplexing. I was absolutely certain that David's spirit was rolling around with laughter at my colossal misunderstanding. But soon I found that a well-respected Harvard astrophysicist, Howard Smith, indeed a third project with the project with Art Green that's coming out soon, Howard had published on this very congruence. And I found that many other scientists have been edging towards similar, if not theological, ideas about the unity of all matter. And late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, in his 2011 book, The Great Partnership, Science, Religion, and the Search for Meaning, wrote eloquently of how science and religion offer not conflicting accounts of the universe, but rather two complementary points of view. The first, demonstrating the mechanism, and the second, giving us the meaning. And in his lyrical distillation of Kabbalah, the 13-petaled rose, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz told of how the soul swings between reaching for the divine and plunging into the physical world, that this oscillation is the very nature of life itself. In both the ascent to God and the descent to matter, there is holiness. Never is any one way wholly sufficient unto itself, and it is only when they exist together that they constitute a real passage between heaven and earth. Hence, my subtitle for this book, The Grand Unification, riffing, of course, on Grand Unification theory. Now, let's move to comparing, finally, the illuminations of the three Psalms at hand. Here you see my illuminations of Psalm 29 from I Will Wake the Dawn. And shortly, I'll show you the very different treatment in my Kabbalat Shabbat book. Think about the power expressed in this poem. The crash of a lightning storm may shock us. The ferocity of an earthquake may shake the earth under our very feet, but the power of the eternal Almighty who created the entire cosmos dominates all the forces of nature. Witnessing that power, the psalmist looks toward the divine for strength and peace. His awe at the divine power manifest in the natural world is not fear in the sense of terror. Rather, he reflects the overwhelming divine power manifest in this most fearsome phenomenon of nature should encourage us to approach, to rely upon God. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "Fear is the anticipation and expectation of evil or pain, as contrasted with hope, which is the anticipation of good. Awe, on the other hand, is the sense of wonder and humility inspired by the sublime or felt in the presence of mystery. Fear is a surrender of the succors which reason offers. Awe is the acquisition of insights which the world holds in store for us. Awe, unlike fear, does not make us shrink from the awe-inspiring object, but on the contrary, draws us nearer to it. That is why awe is compatible with both love and joy." So the illuminations accompanying Psalm 29 depict the burning bush and the parting of the Red Sea, the two central miracles in which the Almighty overturned the laws of nature to bring the nascent children of Israel from slavery into freedom. In this first of my deep explorations of this psalm, I stayed within the bounds of biblical literature and midrash upon it for my imagery, hoping to link the poem specifically to the larger world of the Hebrew Bible. As you'll see, the paintings of Psalm 29 that I did for the Kabbalat Shabbat book reveal a very different focus. Now, since around 1100 CE, this psalm has been sung during the procession of the Torah scrolls from the reading table back to the Ark on Sabbath and festival morning synagogue services. The alternating lines of gold and text suggest the punctuated rhythm of the melody with which this psalm is most commonly sung nowadays. The Midrash, or at least in the States, the Midrash observes that God's name is included 18 times in the course of the psalm. Since traditionally no word of the Hebrew Bible can be considered redundant, each utterance must have a unique meaning. Each is associated with a unique way in which God preserves, protects, and heals Israel. And here, each is written in the sky blue associated with a special tchelet color, used in particular ancient Israelite ritual objects, such as the prayer fringers at tzitzit. The Hebrew text of the poem is accompanied by a painting depicting the burning bush, the miracle through which God first revealed God's self to Moses. According to Midrash on Exodus, the Shekhinah, the most accessible of the divine emanations, something of a funnel through which divine energy pours into the world, descended from heaven and spoke with Moses from the middle of a rose-bearing thorn bush. Why was the rose chosen? The rabbis offered several explanations. Just as the thorn bush is the lowliest of all the trees in the world, so Israel were lowly and humble in Egypt. Just as one makes makes of thorns a fence for the garden, so Israel is a fence to the world. Moreover, just as the thorn bush grows near any water, so Israel grew only in virtue of the Torah that is called water. Further, just as thorns grow in the garden and by the river, so Israel participates both in this world and the world to come. Also, just as a thorn bush produces roses and thorns, so among Israel are there righteous and wicked. Now, you can see that the remarkable fire that sparked from the bush is black here. The rabbis quoted in the Midrash on Exodus reason that the heavenly fire that sparked from the bush is black. Heavenly fire shoots out branches upwards, burns, but does not consume, and is black in color. Whereas fire used here below does not branch upwards and is red and consumes, but does not burn. Why did God show Moses such a symbol? Because he, Moses, had thought to himself that the Egyptians might consume Israel. Hence did God show him a fire which is burnt but did not consume, saying to him, just as the thorn bush is burning and is not consumed, so the Egyptians will not be able to destroy Israel. The painting accompanying the English text presents a depiction of the parting of the Red Sea. Moses points his staff over the water as the cloud with which God led the children of Israel sweeps across the sea, parting its waves. Overhead flies an eagle, its young chicks resting securely on top of its arms. On wings rather, alluding to the reassurances of God's enduring protection of Israel in Exodus 19:4 and Midrash upon it. And how I bore you on eagle's wings. How is the eagle distinguished from all other birds? All other birds carry their young between their feet, being afraid of other birds flying higher above them. The eagle, however, is afraid only of men who might shoot at him. He therefore prefers that the arrows lodge in him rather than in his children. As it is said, and in the wilderness where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bore thee, as a man doth bear his son, quoting from Deuteronomy. As the psalmist assures us, however mighty and fearsome the natural world seems, only the creator of the cosmos reserves power over earth, air, water, and fire to protect his people. And now for something rather different. Whereas in my earlier book, I was concerned with the association between the psalm and key events in the Bible, in the Kabbalat Shabbat project, the goal was to illustrate the flow of divine energy, known as the Shefa, into the world on Shabbat, and to enable the reader to perceive the association between the scientific and mystical understandings of the cosmos. So here, the psalmist, and thus my paintings, focus on experiencing God's work, both the ear-splitting crashing of earthquakes, storms, and cracking trees, and the beauty of birth among the gentlest and loveliest creatures through our sense of sound. The illuminations convey how we experience the power of the Creator through sound. The paintings offer imagery of sound waves reverberating through the text, while below, in a forest of mighty trees, a gazelle nurses its fragile newborn in the wake of thunder and earthquake. Strong cedar trees break, while from their roots new shoots spring, and the delicate almond blossoms that signal divine leadership blossom from broken trunks. The caper bushes, growing from dry rock, put forth blossom and fruit, symbolizing in the Talmud Israel's ability to persevere through adversity, supported only by God's unseen but nonetheless outstretched arm. Now, let me introduce you to an image I used extensively in this project, and indeed many others. This is an image of the ultra-deep field of space compiled by the Hubble Space Telescope, showing the heavens as far back as the early universe to the present day, or actually 2014. I use this image to convey the idea of the flow of energy throughout the universe, and the idea that every particle of space, time, and material has been processed through the stars innumerable times since the Big Bang, the moment of creation. Here, the view of the deep sky through the storm clouds witnesses the presence of the eternal divine suffusing all of the universe. Flowering myrrh bushes, shaken along with the earth under their roots, have cast their fragrant blossoms across the land. Eagle flying overhead suggests qualities of divine protection and the protection of the soul of the nation of Israel. And as I read to you a moment ago, Midrash on the Song of the Sea relates divine protection to an eagle's protection of its chicks. The 13th century Spanish Kabbalist Joseph Gicatilla builds on this traditional midrashic metaphor about divine protection by comparing the eagle's strength to Israel's soul, refreshed and strengthened when the mystical channels of blessing are in good repair. Let's move on to consider Psalm 92, which since temple times, Jewish tradition has designated as the special psalm for Shabbat. Here you see my first pair of illuminations of this psalm. It is good and good for you to praise God, the psalmist declares in these verses. Originally sung in the sacred space of the temple during the sacred period of the Sabbath, this psalm contrasts the fortunes of the righteous, the God-fearing Israelite, with those of Israel's enemies. Whereas those who would dwell within the sacred space of God's house, implicitly honoring the sacred Sabbath day, will flourish and live to a happy and fruitful old age, their persecutors, who initially proliferate like grass, are ultimately cut down. The realization of the promised reward to the righteous reaffirms God's ultimate fidelity to his people. In the Illuminations, I focus on that traditional message and the antiquity of the synagogue's role as a sacred space for the prayer that has replaced sacrifices since the destruction of the temple in 70. The Illuminations present the serene grandeur of the sacred space, here inspired by the ancient El Riba synagogue on the Tunisian island of Jerba. One of the most ancient synagogues still in continuing use. According to legend, El Riba was first constructed by priests fleeing the first destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. The celestial blue tiles of the synagogue here take the form of a mosaic, embodying the abstract concept of sacred space. A mosaic, after all, is a human abstraction of a continuous image. The psalm compares the righteous person to two trees, a tall, straight, and sweetly fruiting date palm, and the cedar of Lebanon, whose wood is so strong and fragrant that, as we saw earlier, it was chosen by Solomon for the construction of the first temple. The psalm describes these trees and the righteous people they represent, growing not in nature, but deliberately transplanted into the temple itself. The Midrash on Psalm 92 describes the relationship of the graceful palm to the righteous of Israel. Like the palm tree, whose trunk goes straight up toward the sky, the heart of Israel is directed to their Father in heaven. The palm shown here thus sprouts three trunks. These potted trees, transplanted into holy surroundings, exist both in the abstract mosaic conception of the sacred space, but also as naturalistic, living, and flourishing plants laden with fruit and delicate foliage. The righteous person imbued with the awe of the Lord not only accepts the abstract principle of the covenant with the divine, but also enjoys its living, tangible benefits. In contrast, the non-believing persecutor lies crushed and withering like grass under the tall, straight palm. Here's my treatment of Psalm 92 in my Kabbalat Shabbat book. In the mystical reading, this special psalm for Shabbat describes how, during the sacred Shabbat, the righteous Jewish soul, replete with the extra soul that descends from the heavens on Shabbat, is transplanted into the temple's sacred space to praise God's eternal goodness. Thus, the illuminations present a mystical allegory of the Shekhinah and the soul planted in the sacred place and time. The mystical tradition compares the glory of the Shekhinah, who's likened to the Shabbat, who becomes the Shabbat bride, to the fragrance and beauty of a field of holy apples, within which the verses rest. On the eve of Shabbat, the tradition holds, God unites with the Sabbath bride in the holy field, and the souls of the righteous spring from their union. The branches of these apple trees grow in a fractal pattern, such as are found throughout the natural world. The fractal here has tree branches branching repetitively in the shape of the Hebrew letter Shin, as in the divine name, Shaddai, found on every mezuzah scroll. Drawing upon the same midrash as my earlier illuminations of the psalm, the potted cedar and palm derive directly from the psalm's comparison of these two trees to the righteous person, growing not in nature, but transplanted to the sacred precincts of the temple. They flourish, their height, strength, and fruit, sweetly praising the Creator. I'm showing you now my illuminations of Psalm 96 from I Will Wake the Dawn. And I hope you can see how much fun I had in painting these. This exclamation of awe at God's power and justice is another part of the Friday evening Kabbalat Shabbat, or welcoming the Sabbath liturgy, begun by Isaac Luria's mystical community in 16th century Tzfat. The Kabbalists compared the Psalm's heralding of God's coming to earth in the temple to the commencement of the sacred time of the Sabbath. The illuminations focus on verse 11, a beloved dance lyric in Jewish tradition, in which the majestic heavens, earth, and sea exult in God's presence in the material world that surrounds us. One of my goals in the overall project of I Will Wake the Dawn was to reveal the sources of many Jewish folk dance songs. Who knew? And this is a great example. The Hebrew illumination commences with a glowing sunrise viewed from the mountaintop fortress of Masada. The English illumination presents a view of the Mediterranean waves crashing on the rocks at the mouth of the Rosh Hanikra grottos at the Israel-Lebanon border. The golden leafy scrollwork is characteristic of Renaissance French and Italian manuscript illumination and alludes to the light of God, the gold reflecting from the page, and simple delight and joy. Here you see my illuminations for Psalm 96 from Kabbalat Shabbat. Who of us, standing at the seashore, amid the clamor of thundering waves and rustling palms, have not been overcome by the grandeur of creation, struck with awe at the power that created such drama? The divine power in the wind, the Ruach HaKodesh in Hebrew, literally the wind or spirit of God, has caught the psalmist's attention in Psalm 96. And my focus in relating the psalm to the Kabbalistic idea of the special flow of divine energy into the world on Shabbat. In the illuminations, the singing of the trees, the roaring of the waves, and the energy rushing through the ever-evolving heavens announce the presence of God in the physical world. The spectral emission lines for the gases most prevalent in air appear in the wavy borders separating scenes of the windblown beach from the text. The imagery of the double curtains blowing in the wind, so that you can see at either side, symbolizes the human soul's ability to accept God's presence and judgment. Midrash on the Song of Songs compares the human soul to a curtain. The workaday world may seem to darken the soul with grime, but our ability to repent and accept divine law on Yom Kippur leaves our souls pure and light, like fresh white linen curtains. Even in its impure state, the human soul, capable of repentance, tshuva, thus always remains a thing of beauty to its creator, whose omnipresent power the psalmist celebrates in Psalm 96. As my partner in this project, Raymond Scheindlin, wrote, the Psalms included in this service must have seemed a most appropriate way of stimulating the worshipers to meditate on the meaning of Sabbath as a remembrance of the work of creation. Indeed, to these mystics, the Sabbath not simply as an act of remembrance of creation, it was a reenactment of the original act of creation and a prefiguration of the future Messianic era. By properly observing the Shabbat, the worshiper participates in renewing the original act of creation, thereby helping to guarantee the fecundity of the world for the coming week and a hastening of the Messiah. By properly observing the Sabbath, the worshiper joins with God in bringing about the redemption of Israel and the creation of that new world. Thus, in this psalm, along with the other throne ascension psalms in the service, expressed the Kabbalist theology. So just as many of the 150 psalms were likely composed, edited, and re-edited to fit the many needs of life in the Jerusalem temples, I hope that you see in my paintings how their visual interpretations can respond to the reader's widely different contexts and human moments. Thank you. I'm looking forward to discussing all of this with you.